David Fetterman, reconocido profesor, consultor e investigador en el área de evaluación. Cuenta con doctorado en Antropología Médica y Educativa por la Universidad de Stanford, director de Fetterman y Asociados, la cual provee consultoría en el tema de evaluación en Estados Unidos y a nivel internacional. Profesor y director de la Maestría en Análisis de Políticas y Evaluación de Programas en la Escuela de Educación de la Universidad de Stanford. Ha recibido numerosos premios y reconocimientos por su trabajo en el área educativa y de evaluación, los cuales incluyen el Premio Maydral para la práctica en evaluación, que representa el máximo honor de la Asociación Americana de Evaluación. Bienvenido, Dr. David Fetterman.
Gracias. Muchas gracias. Great. Thank you. Let me switch over one second. Muchas gracias. There we go. It's working. Yes, I need to thank all of you, of course, first. Muchas gracias for coming. I want to thank the speaker just before me because they highlighted accreditation, and empowerment evaluation was used for accreditation at Stanford University. And we were focusing not just on accountability, but also on learning, so that evaluation is not just for accountability purposes. Thank you, gracias. Not just for accreditation, not for accountability, but also to help enhance learning at an institution. When we think about that, we're changing sort of the whole nature of education through evaluation. And I'll be highlighting a number of examples of using empowerment evaluation as a tool to improve evaluation and education. And only one of them will be in the med school. So you can see how diverse the approach is and how it can be used in so many different kinds of settings. Once again, if I'm going fast, remember I've only been in California for 20 years, so I've slowed down compared to what I used to speak like. So hang in there and, of course, interrupt me anytime. I want to give you a sort of an overview of empowerment evaluation, and then, as I say, give you case examples, including what we've done at Stanford. Before I go into that, I want to give you a context for what's called stakeholder involvement approaches to evaluation. Empowerment is only one. There are a number of different kinds of approaches where you bring in students, faculty, administrators into the process of assessing medical education, into the process of assessing community health organizations and educational institutions in general. I want to compare the different kinds of stakeholder approaches to evaluation by the role of the key evaluator. There are many other ways you could break it down. A colleague of mine who does fantastic cartoons illustrates the differences in our recent book, Collaborative, Participatory, and Empowerment Evaluation, Stakeholder Involvement Approaches. And you can see in one of them, on collaborative, with your ongoing support, we can make this evaluation a success. It's where the evaluator is still in charge, but they're saying, you know, if you collaborate with me, we can improve the assessment of the program. In participatory, it's really, we're sharing it. You're in charge, I'm in charge, we work together to do this evaluation. In empowerment evaluation, it's normal evaluation with one tiny change. You're turning everything on its head, where you're in charge and I'm a coach and facilitator. It changes the dynamics of evaluation, and particularly in medical education, to the point where you normally have an evaluator that everyone runs away from. Instead, with empowerment evaluation, folks come to you to learn as quickly as they can while they can still make changes before it's too late at the end of the course, for example. It's a very different dynamic of that relationship. It's a much healthier one in many regards. So for collaborative evaluation, very briefly, as I said, it's a form of evaluation in which there's a substantial amount of collaboration between the two. And Liliana Rodriguez Campos and O'Sullivan, they focus on that kind of evaluation, which is very useful. but it still keeps the evaluator in charge, and everyone else is still the participant in the evaluation, in the program, etc. With participatory, as I said, it's more shared, and the work of Cousins and Whitmore focus on that, and it once again highlights the practical and sometimes transformative nature, but it's a joint ownership in evaluation. So all of that I'm introducing so far is considered somewhat revolutionary, or it was at least 20 years ago. Now it's become a core part of the American Evaluation Association, but it was revolutionary to think that anyone could do an evaluation aside from the expert, instead of the expert being a colleague and working together with folks, as well as, of course, being a coach. In the work I developed when I was the president of the American Evaluation Association about 21 years ago, I introduced this as my plenary talk for my presidential address. And trust me, it was revolutionary at the time. Half of the population across the world, actually, that was involved, loved it, embraced it, and wondered, why is it taking so long for this to come? And the other half were, what is this? Why are you introducing this? And we're the only experts. And there was a concern about, of course, giving the profession away. Now it's over a fourth of the membership is a part of the Participatory, Collaborative, and Empowerment Division. And we had our 21st anniversary recently, and folks who were very critical are now laudatory because they've seen, in fact, the actual results when you produce this kind of evaluation. It's international. Our work is in Australia, Canada, Ethiopia, Mexico here. We have some work that's ongoing. Nepal, which I'll be returning to in September, New Zealand, South Africa, and so on. Oscar Figueroa is doing some beautiful work, by the way, with CIS and GIS work, as well as empowerment evaluation here in Mexico. The only thing you need to do an empowerment evaluation is one thing, and that is a desire for a better life, a better program, a better community. I work in squatter settlements in South Africa, and on the left you can see, if you're familiar with any of these, there are sometimes 20,000 people at a time with really very little electricity, almost no water, and they simply exist, just barely. But if you notice on the right side over here, over there, it's a daycare center. So even in the midst of what would be considered utter poverty, impoverishment, and disease, there's hope for a better life for the next generation. That's all you need, and when you're doing, a lot of you may be involved in community health and medicine. I'll be talking about a couple of projects we're doing in that regard, but also, of course, in schools and educational programs. All you need is to want to improve what's going on. Keep in mind, most folks worry about whether it's going to be objective or too subjective, and they're going to inflate how great they're doing. The reality is when you have something like empowerment evaluation, it's the first chance to fix what's broken. And I don't care if you're a physician, whether you're a student to becoming a physician, a medical student, whether you're a community activist, whatever it may be, in your organization, you know your programs are usually broken in some fashion, and you want to be able to fix them. This becomes a window of opportunity to improve and build. The few examples I want to just highlight today is some of our work in schools, academic distress in Arkansas, a $15 million project funded by Hewlett-Packard to bridge the digital divide in communities of color, and of course our work at Stanford, where I was the director of evaluation in the School of Medicine. I'll highlight just very briefly also that we work in tobacco prevention in Arkansas. We're in our 12th year in reducing tobacco use and consumption. I work in Google as well, where we're training Google folks to think about how to self-assess their programs and improve their work. And of course, I use it in higher education, not just at Stanford, but at places like Pacifica Graduate Institute. I just want to highlight some of the things the students are doing there as well. There'll be very fast, broad strokes as I go along, of course, and happy to provide more detail both in the articles and the books that we have. We have 16 books that I've written so far on some of this work, and hundreds of articles, but I can highlight one or two for you so you don't have to read them all. But they highlight much more detail than we can cover in the broad strokes today. Also, just wanted to mention, this can all be done remotely as well as face-to-face. I work with over 50 computer science education evaluators, and I've never met, I think, more than 2 of them face-to-face. We meet every 2 weeks on Zoom. And we've conducted this process of empowerment evaluation online. So it does not always have to be face-to-face. And at Stanford, of course, you have nurses who can't always be there, physicians who cannot always be present. So you can do it with as many people as possible online, and then you consult with them, of course, face-to-face when you can, and you bring the information to them. So there can be done many ways where you don't have everyone available to meet at the same time. It's the same true in communities I work in as well. So I've done enough of that. Let me just tell you where I'm going, and that's going to be the definition. May as well get to that as long as we're here. Why not? The theory behind it, concepts, and the steps. And there are only 3 steps. Every one of us in this room can do this. It's extremely easy. And it's been adapted in 16 different countries to date. So the basic definition is simply the use of evaluation concepts, techniques, and findings to foster improvement and self-determination. An expanded definition is that it aims to increase the probability of achieving program success. You can probably already see this is not evaluation as a neutral scientific experiment. Yes, it's rigorous, yes, it's academic, but it's aimed at helping you get to where you want to go. It's not designed just to say, oh, you didn't do well, slapped you on the wrist, you did bad, so long. No. If you didn't do well, how do we get you where you want to go? That's what this is about. And it increases the probability, there are no guarantees in life, but increases the probability of achieving program success. By providing program stakeholders with tools for assessing the planning, implementation, and self-evaluation of your program. And this is the critical part coming up. It also involves mainstreaming evaluation as part of the planning and management of the program. One of the big mistakes we've made, unfortunately, as we've developed in our specialties and our specializations, is we've artificially separated out all of these things. The reality is you come up with a program, you come up with a policy, you implement it. You implement it, you should be evaluating it. You evaluate it, you revise the program, and you revise the policy. And guess what? You evaluate that. It's a cycle. And we've artificially separated them out. So I see these phenomenal strategic plans, literally thousands of them in a year. Beautiful, but they don't go anywhere because they're not grounded in evaluation. And the evaluation is not grounded in what the mission is of the institution. What I'm talking about gives a lot more intellectual coherence to the activity and thus greater sustainability. I didn't draw this tree, so don't blame me if it's not too artistically neat. This is Marv Alkin. He's a major theorist in the field. And he took some of the major the top evaluation theorists in the country, and a good part of the work he highlights is in one limb, which is on how we value information. A lot of people thought I belong in the methods because I do a lot of work with treatment control, experimental design, ethnographic work, etc. But they put me here, ready to fall off at any time, that limb over there. I know, I'm just happy to be on the tree. But mine, I think they did correctly. It's focused on use. What do you do with the evaluation information? So I think that is correct. I think that there are different stages of all of our lives, and maybe at an earlier stage in my life, I was probably more of a methods person. And let me just give you a cute little story, if I could, for a second. I was at a Passover dinner, and my Aunt Mary asked me this dreaded question that none of us like to have posed. What do you actually do for a living? I didn't want to have to answer that one. I was so steeped in experimental design, treatment control, methods, I said, I'm a methodologist. Well, she said, does that mean you're not Jewish anymore? No, it's okay. I'm still Jewish. It's all right. But I realized I was so narrow in my conceptualization of my identity that I was talking about methods as my identity rather than who I am as a human being, trying to use evaluation for feedback to improve programs. So she taught me how to be a little more simple and straightforward in my communication and a little less narrow in my outlook. So I think by that point, maybe that helped push me over towards the use side of the tree. Anyway, I like to be intellectually honest sort of where I am, and I am more committed to what do you do with this to use to improve rather than just the methods themselves, even though I spent quite a few decades on working on methods and perfecting them and have some books on that I think are very useful, but I can see where the bottom line is, what do you do with all this? So anyway, let me give you some very broad contrasts and complex. These are broad strokes, just to give you a feel for the difference between what is traditional evaluation and empowerment. In traditional evaluation, you typically have it's an external activity done towards or to someone or some group. And in empowerment evaluation, it's internal. You're assessing yourself. In traditional forms, you usually have this external expert, like me, like a number of you, and we do a great job, but we have no real interface, interrelationship, the way you do in empowerment, where you have a coach or critical friend, where they're in charge of the evaluation, where they want to go, what they want to assess, and you're the coach and critical friend that keeps it rigorous, on track, etc. In traditional forms of evaluation, it is perceived as data being warehoused. Why? Because we do our surveys, which are great and important, and it takes time to get, first wave, second wave, get a good response rate, and then, of course, you have to do something with all that data and sort it and analyze. People are already making decisions. And if you don't have the data to inform it, they don't care anymore. And that's true in our academic institutions as well, which is why we revised how we do evaluation at the School of Medicine at Stanford. We even have focus groups in the middle of the course to see how things are going so that we can make changes in the course before it's too late. And that's both content as well as pedagogy. It also, when you do traditional forms of evaluation, it may foster dependency, always depending on the expert, me, you, etc. In empowerment evaluation, you are developing the human being to be more self-determined, to build their evaluation capacity that can take it anywhere they want. In traditional forms of evaluation, you do have independent judgment, which is invaluable. And I believe it's incredibly valuable in empowerment evaluation, but in empowerment evaluation, you have a collaboration rather than independent judgment. I certainly have groups come over and assess our groups while we're doing an empowerment evaluation, but the problem with having just independent assessment is it may not be in touch with where the program is developmentally. If you implement a new program in the School of Medicine, and someone comes in and assesses it as if it's a 10 years old and been a very fully mature program, you'll kill it. You have to respect the developmental cycle of where it is, and that's why empowerment is usually in touch with where that cycle is, because it has all the participants involved. Traditional evaluations are nice, but they rarely go beyond the prescribed purpose and single time frame that they're given. Empowerment evaluation is ongoing and continuous. There is no end to the loop because there's no end to learning. And that's what I focused on with evaluation. Yes, part of it, as we discussed earlier, that excellent presentation we just heard, can be on accountability and making sure we have a decent program, quality, etc. But if you also want to have learning, then you need to have a continuous loop of assessment. And that's what empowerment evaluation is about. Having said all that, external and internal evaluation are not mutually exclusive, but if it's external, it should be rooted in internal concerns. Now, I have about 6 hours to go over theory, is that right? Oh, no, is that not? Oh, all right, yeah, you're looking, yes, I hear. No. Just a few seconds on theory, if I would, if you don't mind. I think they're going to be useful, but I'll keep it short. One of the most powerful underlying theories in empowerment evaluation is called process use. The more that people engage in the act of conducting their own evaluations, the more likely it is that they will find the results credible and act on the recommendations. Why? Because they're theirs. If I come up with a recommendation, you may agree, he's an expert, he knows this, he knows that. When I'm gone, you go back to your regular stuff. There's no ownership, so no sustainability. But if you come up with it, you have a vested interest, and that's what this is about. Your vested interest is put on the table, so you have a vested interest in pursuing it, the assessment, And people talk about, David, you go into programs and you say you like programs for dropouts, you like school medicine programs of various sorts. I say it's because I like them that I want them better. I'm going to be more critical versus someone who doesn't really care. I'm just in there for the assessment and I leave. It changes the dynamic of what that relationship can be. So that's process use. It improves what's called knowledge utilization, because too much evaluation sits and gathers dust. This improves the use of it, which is what we're all about, rather than simply a great, fantastic, scientific, perfect piece of work that doesn't do anything. How many folks have been to London, know this, have seen this, Mind the Gap sign? Anyone? Hands, anyone seen this? Just a few. I hadn't seen it before either. I was doing a project in London, and I was just, my mind, how your mind gets wrapped up in the work and you're kind of worried about how you're going to present it and all the rest of stuff and all the arguments you have to deal with and stuff. So I get on to the tube, the subway, and I hear, "Mind the Gap," really loud. I'm going, what the heck was that? Is it Gap jeans? Or I didn't know what it was, right? So, but I just get onto the tube and no big deal. I get to the meeting, we hash out all these issues and problems because there are always aggravations and problems. Nothing's running smoothly. But it's running, but if people saw what's on the inside, they notice it's a lot messier. But, and then it's time finally to go home. It's about 6 o'clock, and I get back onto the tube, and I hear, "Mind the Gap," one more time, right? I'm going, what the heck? There's a 1.5 foot gap between the platform and the tube. I could have killed myself, right? So this is my narrow way of looking at life. I said, oh, this is empowerment evaluation. Watch, here's what I saw. When I saw that sign, I saw what's called the theory of action, which is what the organization says they're about: equity, fairness, being good to each other, etc. And then there's something else called the theory of use, which is the observed reality and behavior, where we don't always live up to what we're doing. In empowerment evaluation, we try to mind the gap and close the gap. That's what it's all about, so that we begin to walk our talk. We profess this issue and this, and they're all wonderful aspirational comments and phrases that we have in our mission and everything else, but we don't always live up to that. And our job is to use evaluation to have feedback to make us closer to who we want to be. Whether we're preparing physicians, young medical students to become physicians and learn how to do a good medical examination under the garment, not just on top of the garment. Whatever the minutiae and details are that we're focusing on, we want to do it better and better and better. But it's only by having feedback on what we actually observe in terms of our behavior that we change and get closer to where we espouse our aspirations of what kind of individuals we want to be, and our students and the community that we work in. As I'm talking a little bit more, I just want you to highlight a couple of key concepts I want you to be thinking about as I go through the examples. One is that we focus on evidence as a core, as you'll see over here. Collecting evidence is a core. Having a critical friend who can help keep this on track, usually a trained evaluator. That we build a culture of evidence. Every one of us has an opinion of one sort or another about why we do things. But we're not always forced to make it explicit. And that's what this process is about. And I'll show you how we do it shortly. So you build a culture of expectation that when you have an opinion, you have some evidence behind it, and you present it. You have cycles of reflection and action, where basically you think about the data, you actually think about what's going on, and then you act on it, and then you assess that. And it's a cycle that goes around. In the process, you're building a community of learners where we're all learning. None of us know everything, and that includes me. We're constantly learning, but we need each other to do this. And ideally, we're building reflective practitioners where each and every one of us want to improve what we're doing and think about that in a very explicit way every day, rather than just going along with the standard operating procedures. One of the things I got hit on and told I was wrong about is the coaching. I was told when I first presented this, David, you can't have coaches in evaluation. We're adults. We have to do this by ourselves. So I started thinking about that, and I thought, at first I thought, yeah, I guess that's true. We're on our own. So then I went home and I thought, well, wait a minute. My daughter is in volleyball. She has a coach. She jumps with horses. You think I'm going to let her do that without a coach? You got to be kidding me. And then my biggest exercise was going from the parking lot to the med school office, and that was it. So I thought, I better go back to the gym. But you think I'm going to go to the gym without a coach and hurt my back or something? I'm not crazy. So I got a coach. Financial advisors, coaches. Learning to drive or to race, you have a coach. It suddenly occurred to me, no, this guy who was criticizing me was completely wrong. We all have coaches. Do we let any student just do an operation without being coaching? I don't think so, right? Would we want, any of us want that? No. We all have coaches in life. So he was on an interesting track, and as I started thinking about it, he was completely wrong. And sorry to spend so much time on this, but I want to highlight why it's not so unusual that you would also expect to have a coach as you do evaluation, as you learn to do evaluation yourself. This is where I also operate as a coach in some of our tobacco prevention work in Arkansas. We're in our 12th year of keeping minority kids primarily and some adults away from tobacco, which is no small feat when the tobacco industry spends over $110 million in advertising alone in a small state like Arkansas. Not an easy task, but we're succeeding. These are some of my empowerment evaluators that work with me. This is Linda Delaney, helping facilitate some of the 22 grantees we have. They are ranging from hospitals to churches to nonprofits, all working together to reduce tobacco consumption in Arkansas. I won't go over all these principles, but these are key principles guiding empowerment evaluation, is to help improve how the community is working, how the hospitals are working, how the programs are working. There should be community ownership. There should be inclusion. And let me explain why inclusion is so important. When I was giving my talk about empowerment evaluation 21 years ago to first introduce this to the field, I wanted to be exciting and dynamic and different because there's a whole different way of looking at evaluation. So what I did is I have a guest speaker come, a plenary speaker, and I was told I could not tell anyone who it was because he wanted secrecy, confidentiality, a surprise, etc. So I'm introducing him like I'm speaking right here, right now. And I go, I would like to tell you about this individual. I've read their work since I was a kid, double Nobel laureate, and he's here to speak to you today. I could spend the entire morning talking about it, but I'd rather just have you hear him. I'd like to welcome Dr. Albert Einstein. Wait a minute, didn't he die quite a few years ago? I hired an actor. He does this for Motorola, he does it for all these other things. His hair is like this all over the place. He waves his hands all over the crazy place. He has all the great gestures. He knows all the verbatim quotations. And I wanted him to help introduce this new approach. So, and this to a lot of skeptical evaluators, so it was a very interesting situation. And I don't tell everyone this, but here's one aside that before I tell the actual story about it. He told me he wanted to be put in a dumbwaiter. You know, those little elevator things you put the food up but no one can see you, because he didn't want anyone to see him. So I'm thinking to myself, what if the elevator or the dumbwaiter breaks? They're going to think I'm crazy if he doesn't show up, right? Luckily, it worked out. He showed up. But that was a little scary. However, keep in mind, I was wearing my suit. I had a cowboy hat on because it was in Texas, and all of my board members had stars so you could identify who they were. So you have this image of me with a cowboy hat and my suit, and he has a problem. He has those remote microphones. Using empowerment evaluation to help make that transfer. This is me in my class at Stanford and my students, and we're video conferencing with tribal digital villagers, which is worth $15 million to HP with that one picture. They didn't care about statistics, they didn't care about traditional forms of evidence. They wanted a picture had face validity that they were bridging the digital divide. At Stanford, as I said before, since we don't have time today, we have an article on that. That's in Academic Medicine, on exactly how we help transform the curriculum from a Flexnerian model of 2 years science and then 2 years clinical to bring the clinical up front in the first years so a student knows if they're going to be, if you want to be a doctor or not early on instead of waiting that long. Anyway, but we went through the same process to use empowerment evaluation to get through our accreditation as well, because of course it improves participation. Or I should say, statistically we're at the 0.04 level, which is phenomenal. in our work to establish the impact of empowerment evaluation in the med school transformation. Finally, in Arkansas, we also work on tobacco prevention, and we have to work with the legislature. So we transformed our work into a language that the legislature could understand, money, by highlighting the return on investment by doing this. When we put all of the groups together, rather than just operating alone, we identified that we saved the state over $84 million US in excess medical costs by the nature of our work. Anyway, one last thing I did want to highlight, which is that there's tremendous serendipity in empowerment evaluation, where you can be working together with groups that you hadn't thought you might work together with, and new ideas come. We survived our tobacco prevention work because one of the governors was going for the presidential, he was a presidential candidate. He wanted to steal our money from tobacco and use it into obesity because it was a little sexier topic. Well, we had the numbers, we had the figures, we had the documentation. But still, it was an incredible hassle to try to survive doing that. So I didn't come up with this. The group came up with this in the community that we should have an Evaluation Arkansas Center. We developed it, we went to the state, we got the House passed it, the Senate passed it, and the governor signed it into law. We actually have one now, which we didn't have before. Last thing I wanted to mention is just technology, because I know I'm at the end, it's almost 11. I want to mention we use technology with graduate students as well as with seasoned professionals, and we use different rubrics. We look at the self-assessment, compare it with a peer assessment, which I'm doing right now. I'm teaching a course right now on that. We're having students assess themselves and the proposals they're writing. We're having, of course, peers assess it, and then we are, as the instructors, assessing it. And the thing I want to highlight was we define what we mean by high, medium, and low, and we use Zoom, and we also use Google Forms because it's free. And there's a self-evaluation looks like this, peer evaluation like this, and watch this. When you put them together, we match, even though we did them independently to show how powerful self-assessment can be aligned with our own traditional evaluation externally. And we improved our feedback midway through the course instead of waiting to the end. I'll end with this. I simply want to mention that when you use technology, which we use a lot, you don't have to. When I work in townships in South Africa for HIV, diabetes, high blood pressure, guess what? Sometimes we have gum and pieces of paper and tape, and that's all we have. When we have the capacity to use, of course, LCD projectors and Zoom and everything else, of course, and working remotely with Zoom, as I say, Google Hangout or whatever, of course it can enhance it and make it easier, but you don't have to. You can do this whether you're working in community health or in the classroom here, and anywhere you want, using low technology or high, but the technology you use should be in alignment with the philosophy of empowerment, which is that it should be a small learning curve. You notice this is 3 steps. All of us can do this. It should be inexpensive and affordable. I'll end on that note, and thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. Muchas gracias.